Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our session today for Developing Partnerships, Collaborations and Consortia. I'm Gillian Askew, I'm your host for today. I'll just give it a minute or so just to let people join. We've got a really good number of registered attendees today, so I'm hoping for a good and busy session. So hang fire for 2 seconds and we'll get started very shortly. And if you can tell, I've just run up the stairs, so I'm a little bit out of breath. Okay, lots of people joining, so we'll give it a few seconds just before we kick off. So whilst people are joining, I'll just go through some introductions. So good morning, welcome everybody. Thank you for taking time out of your busy calendars. Thank you for joining me today for this morning's session on developing partnerships, collaborations and consortia. As I said a second ago, my name is Gillian Askew. I'm one of the co-founders of Go for Growth and I'm your host for this morning's session. But whilst I might be running the session today, all credit and all thanks must go to Cardiff University and Dr. Jane Lynch especially, who has supported us in the collaboration sessions that we've run before and who have kindly given us so much of today's information on collaboration and partnership working. So thank you, Jane. Thank you, Cardiff University. Just a little bit of housekeeping stuff before we crack on. We are on a Zoom webinar today, so the chat and the Q&A function is alive and well. Please do feel free to ask questions and discuss topics throughout. I have set some time aside for discussion and I'll get to that in a second, but do feel free to ask questions as we go. The slides on the collaboration and consortia part before we get to discussion will all be sent out along with a copy of the recording of the session to all registered attendees. It will probably be Monday now before the slides and the recording comes out, but it will come out to everybody that's registered. And we'll be covering today collaborative working, what it is, where do we start, what the benefits of working with others could be, how to choose a partner in the first place. We'll be looking at how we structure consortia. We'll be thinking about how we crunch the numbers and then manage risk, and then the foundations to good collaboration. So hopefully that's what you were hoping to learn about in the session today. We are on a Zoom webinar, so I do have an apology up front in that there are no breakout rooms, unfortunately. However, we do want to try and make this as interactive as possible. And I can unmute people, I think. So if you do want to say something or ask a question live, I think if you raise your hand, I should be able to come over to you. Or you can signal in the chat or the Q&A that you would like to say something. Or as always, you can ask a question in Q&A if you would prefer to. Like I said a second ago, I have set some time aside for discussion. So we have got some dedicated time for questions and for a more collaborative discussion as part of the session. And Go for Growth as an organisation is a collaboration between two businesses. So we've actually got lived experience of working in partnership. And throughout the session, I'll be happy to share my own experiences, but of course, it would be really great to hear about yours or any questions that you might have if you're thinking about going into a consortium or a partnership. So anybody that wants to share the good, the bad, and even the ugly, please do get in touch with me somehow, raise your hand, put something in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll bring you into the discussion. So the session today has got two main purposes. Firstly, in the first sort of 25-30 minutes, I'm going to give an overview of what partnerships and collaborations are, how to go about them. And then secondly, to try and help businesses who are looking for other businesses to work with, we've tried to carve out this time and space to meet and hopefully build relationships, introduce yourself so that you can go on to chat more with other businesses that are on the session today. And so for that reason, it would be great if you could introduce your business in the chat to the other attendees. And just make sure that the chat is set to everyone, not just hosts and panelists. And we'll share all of the details that are entered into the chat with all registered attendees. Now, that's not mandatory. So if you would rather not do an introduction, then please don't feel you have to. Your details will only be shared if you enter them into the chat here. So what that means is by entering those details, you are in effect giving permission for those details to be shared. And I've popped on screen and I've also popped it in the chat. So you should be able to see in the chat from me, those details that you see on screen. What would be good to sort of capture into your intro. And just so we can keep all the information together, if you are making an introduction, if you could do that as just one paragraph in the chat so that it stays together, that would be great. And it's the first time we've tried to run a session where it's got the two parts to it like this. So, and we've developed it following feedback from providers. So hopefully it will work well. So I won't dwell too much on this particular slide, but it is a good reminder of why the public sector is a good potential customer. And I think there are three key elements to what makes the public sector a strong and attractive client. So firstly, the size and stability of the market. There really is almost certainly something for everyone in the public sector, whether that's through a grant funding application or through public sector contracts. Secondly, there is a drive and a real ambition to place more business with the small to medium enterprise market, and that includes micro, sole traders and smaller voluntary sector organisations. And actually, the new regulations for public procurement, which have been assented to law just recently, they'll come into force next year, around October time. They place greater emphasis on removing barriers to entry, which is great news for smaller organisations or voluntary sector organisations. And then thirdly, the focus on local economic development, things like the levelling up agenda, widening participation, etc. They all mean that it could be a really good time to work within the public sector, whatever size of business you are. And we're seeing more and more joint bidding in public procurement. So it can be a really good way of securing growth for larger opportunities that on your own might be too big, too risky, too complex, or where you might need additional skills to complete the requirements. So what we're going to talk about today, obviously, is partnerships, collaborations, and potentially forming a consortia of some kind. So we're going to be focusing everything on working with other businesses to secure opportunities and when this might be an appropriate route to take. But I think first of all, we need to think about this question: would we like to grow our business? And have we considered collaborating with other small business leaders, other sector enterprises and other charities, for example? And that might seem a strange question, especially as this event is dedicated to working with others. But I think the reality is it can often feel like it's in the too difficult space, or it can be actually quite challenging to wrap our heads around how collaboration might affect our ability to compete in the way that we've always competed. And then what do we mean by a consortium, a supplier consortium? And actually all it really means is that a supplier consortium is more than one organisation coming together. In fact, some consortia can involve up to 7, 8 different organisations of all different sizes. So you can go beyond just working with one other organisation, but a consortia actually only really means that more than one organisation has come together for the purposes of working. And I think there is a question there about, do we want to improve our chances of securing higher value public contracts? So I mentioned a second ago that there is a real drive from the public sector to access the whole marketplace. And of course, in the United Kingdom, the majority of our businesses will be classified as small to medium enterprises. It's 5.5 million SMEs in the UK. But it still remains that it can be more difficult for a smaller organisation to compete. And sometimes in public sector contracts, that's because smaller businesses aren't able to meet the selection criteria on things like financial or economic standing, turnover, those things that are required to take part or even qualify in the first place. So one of the reasons to collaborate might simply be to improve our chances of securing those higher value public contracts, as well as the other reasons that I mentioned a second ago in terms of managing risk or sharing risk, dealing with complexity, and of course, making sure that you've got all the skills, all of the products and services to deliver that you might need in your organisation. And there are some key questions that you need to ask yourself before you start collaborating. And one of the big questions is, why collaborate? What are the other options that are out there that would help my business to grow if we didn't use collaboration as that strategy? And collaboration, there are some myths around collaboration that Jane and Cardiff Uni have described to us, in that there's a notion that it's really easygoing and that anybody could collaborate. And I guess that's true, but also not true. Collaborating in business is a whole different ball game to collaborating in our personal lives, where it might feel actually just that bit more natural. It takes time and it takes work up front to do it. And if you're prepared to commit that time and that effort, then actually anyone can go on to collaborate successfully. But it doesn't happen by accident, I think, is the point of the sentence. And one of the things that it definitely does is require a lot of senior buy-in. It requires a lot of investment in time in those upfront stages. And so it's important even to really understand why we need to collaborate. The what's in it for me question. What are we going to get out of collaborating? And some of the reasons of what's in it for me, or the whys, might be what you see on the screen there. So joint working may well be part of your strategy already, and that's because you think it might lead you to new supply networks, for example, or it might lead you to new business opportunities. It might be helping you to fill a skill that you don't currently have in your organisation, or that might be the aspiration for you. So it could help you with logistics, it could help you with IT, those kinds of things. And in terms of what your current mission is, what you're thinking about is, what are my organisation's goals? What are the strengths, the weaknesses? What are the opportunities to collaborate? And how will a partnership really genuinely help my business to grow? And I think that's a really, really important point. But even more important than that is this question of, is my organisation ready to collaborate? Now, fundamentally, at its most basic level, collaboration is a process of managing relationships. That's kind of what it's all about. So collaborative working is a process for managing relationships in a better or a different way. But it does require a certain set of behaviours in order for it to be successful. And so that cultural side of things is a really important factor to consider. So, for example, if in your organisation you're not going to get or have that senior level buy-in to working with other organisations, then you're probably not going to be able to commit the time to make the collaboration work, because it won't necessarily be seen as a priority for the business that you're in. And then if you think in terms of structure, what kind of consortium should we set up? There are lots of different options, actually. And I've got a slide specifically later on to go through a couple, so we'll park that. But at the point where you're thinking about structure, there are a number of different ways that you can go. We're going to go through 2 of them today. But ultimately, the last point on the screen, time, the suggestion is that you really need to start these kind of conversations about collaboration at least 6 months in advance of a contract opportunity becoming available. And that's because it takes time to form a relationship. As we all know, just in life in general, relationships take time. Trust takes time to develop. So you need to start having these conversations as early as possible. And there is a health warning there that if you try and rush it, it's not necessarily doomed to failure, but it is likely that there will be some issues with it being successful in the longer term. And so actually the advice is, think about partnership working, collaboration and consortia very much as a long-term strategy, a real strategic element of your business growth. And we're thinking about the benefits of working together, thinking about what that looks like, what it means. You can see on screen that we've written down a list of some of the benefits as ideas. And you may or may not agree with what I'm about to say, but generally speaking, people will accept that 2 heads are better than 1. And so working with others can give you a richness of viewpoint, of creativity, of innovation, motivation, all of those things. And especially if you're self-employed or in a smaller organisation, or having a smaller business, a smaller voluntary sector organisation, it can sometimes feel like it's a bit of a lonely place. And I think anyone in a leadership position will know some of the isolating parts of leading from the front. And that's particularly so, it's sort of been amplified coming out of the pandemic. And so as businesses, what we're probably all thinking about is, what can I do differently with my business so that I don't get so affected the next time something hits? How can I build that resilience? And what that gives us is an opportunity to look outside of our business. And if we think back to late 2007, early 2008, that financial crash that happened, you would see physical signs on physical buildings of businesses saying closed due to recession. And actually, what closes a business usually is cash flow problems more than anything. But we didn't see that recession coming like COVID. We didn't see COVID coming. And even if we look back now, there were probably lots of indicators to say that it was on its way. We didn't anticipate it, and therefore we wouldn't necessarily have anticipated how it would affect our businesses the way that it did. So I think we can't be complacent in business. And I think maybe generally speaking, small business owners, smaller organizations understand that intrinsically because the nature of the size of the organization. But none of us, I think, regardless, can be complacent in our business. We constantly have to now look outside of our business and be very aware of both the macro environmental, macroeconomic challenges that could potentially risk our business. And collaboration is one way, at least, of sharing that risk across a number of organizations, and it not being quite as singular as it was when you're on your own. But one of the greatest challenges, of course, in collaboration is thinking about who might be the right partner. It's even harder, I think, to meet and build relationships with other businesses when we're living so much of our lives now in the metaverse, in the virtual world. And it's one of the reasons that we're trying an event like this in Go for Growth to see if a virtual event can help encourage virtual collaboration. We're hoping that this is a good place for businesses to meet other businesses, find like-minded people. And hopefully I can see that there's lots of activity in the chat. Hopefully what you'll come away with today is a bunch of virtual business cards. And you might then go on after the session today to chat to or work with one or two of those businesses that are on here today. And if you do create a relationship or a consortia out of anything that's happened here today, or you've got any experiences that you want to chat through in terms of collaboration, please do tell us. We'd love to know. And we're always happy to do case study type work on that kind of thing. So let's think a bit more then about how to choose a partner. It is an area that we have to think really carefully about, and that feels very obvious, but it's worth labouring a point, I think, that we do need to think about who we want to work with now and in the future, and importantly, what value that extra organisation or organisations are going to bring to our business. So this SWOT framework that you can see on the screen in front of you, probably lots of people will be familiar with a SWOT matrix. It's one of the most widely used analytical frameworks. And it's actually really good for understanding collaboration. It's a really useful tool. It's very good for using in that start off in terms of starting off a collaborative partnership arrangement. So basically what you're doing initially is identifying, first of all, as the individual organisation, what your strengths and what your weaknesses are. And your strengths ultimately then become your opportunities, and your weaknesses, if they remain unaddressed, become your threats. So ideally, what you're looking for in terms of a potential partner, and when you're thinking about who might your partner be, you're looking for a complementary set of strengths. So if you want to try and exploit those strengths and make sure that they do become opportunities, you'll be looking for a partner who will help you address also some of those weaknesses that you've got in your organisation, and vice versa. If that doesn't happen, it can cause problems later on. If you're collaborating with someone who has the same strengths and your strengths are different to your values, so we don't want to get confused with what's a strength in our business and what are the behaviours in our business or the culture and the values of our business. You do want to look for somebody who shares a culture and shares values. But if you collaborate with someone where you've got the same strengths in your organisation, you could end up competing against each other rather than cooperating with each other. So do think really carefully about how you use a matrix like this to help you find the right partner. And there is a question actually that I'd like everyone to think about today, if you could. If anyone would like Go for Growth to try and run some practical workshops to do some of these exercises, like how to put a SWOT together specifically for collaboration, please do let us know through the post-event survey, and we'll definitely create them and put those things on. We are conscious that sometimes what we do is we talk about what needs to be done, but then actually doing it can be just as challenging. So if anybody wants those practical workshops that wouldn't be done on a webinar, they would be done on either a Teams meeting or a Zoom meeting where we can all be in a virtual room and be able to chat and see each other, we can definitely do that. So do let us know. So if we think about structuring a consortium, so we talked about the different models being available. You can see 3 on screen. I'm going to talk about 2 of them today. If we're thinking about working with more than one organisation or one other organisation to make us contract ready, for example, or to open up opportunities to help us grow our business, then this particular model that's on screen could be really useful. And it's called the lead body model. It's a well-known model in industry, it's well-known in public sector. And when we've run these sessions before, led by Dr. Jane Lynch, it's certainly one that's recommended. And the reason it's recommended and the reason it's quite popular is that it does give a little bit of structure, but it also speaks to the language of collaboration. So in collaboration, people say that where it goes wrong is that there's an imbalance of power, in that you've always got somebody who makes all of the decisions and then everybody else follows. With the lead body model, however, that's dealt with. So you will have a lead body organisation, and that might be the organisation who has the highest turnover, for example, but whatever the reason, the lead body organisation is the lead body organisation, that's fine. But when it comes to something like decision making, what you then have is a steering group, and each member of the consortium has 1 vote. So everybody is responsible equally for making decisions about what the consortium gets involved in, how it's run, how it's managed, etc. And if you're looking to tender for public sector contracts, for example, the public sector need to award to 1 legal entity. And so effectively in the lead body model, that would be the lead body. There'd be almost certainly an administrative overhead cost to that. And of course, that shouldn't necessarily be absorbed in an imbalanced way. The cost of that would then be spread and split between each of the consortium members. And I think it's really important in this relationship between the lead body organisation, what they really effectively are is the central point of contact, the main point of contact. But ultimately, for the rest of the decisions that happen across the consortium partners, however many that might be, that does need to be shared and agreed equally. And it's really important that that happens in practice. And then if we quickly pick another model, the special purpose vehicle, SPV, this is probably more for collaborations that have been well established for a while. And it's when the consortium actually becomes a legal entity in and of itself, so that each individual organisation can continue trading as their own organisation as they were before, and a percentage of the business is managed through the consortium. And that actually effectively is the model that Go for Growth has taken. So the SPV vehicle can be a very effective model to use. But things to note on SPV, it can take a lot longer to set up because there is a legal structure in there that needs to be considered and set up correctly. So it's likely that if you are going to set up an SPV, you'll take some guidance from your accountant, or you might even take some legal advice before you set up a special purpose vehicle. In Go for Growth, we took both. We took legal advice and we took advice from our accountant to help us set up the legal constructs as well. And I know this seems really obvious, so I apologise if it feels like I'm teaching anyone to suck eggs, but crunching the numbers is super important. It's really important before we start that we do the sums. And it might be something as a simple spreadsheet, such as the one that's on the screen, thinking about what the overhead costs might be to actually get this consortium up and running, things like insurance, banking, administrative resources that you might need. All of that needs to be costed out and shared equally amongst all of the consortium partners to think about what that overhead cost is going to look like. And it is really important to do that at the outset, because if you don't, it's likely that there'll be difficult conversations that come up later on. And I don't want this slide to be misunderstood. What no one is saying for a second is that everybody needs to become accredited with an international standard to be able to manage a collaborative relationship. But there is a huge amount of free help out there to help you when you're thinking about collaboration. And actually what we've suggested is if you're thinking about bidding for a contract as a consortium, for example, whether that's a legal construct or not, think about a more formalized approach to structure your collaboration. And that will not only help you as businesses within that collaboration, but it will also be really reassuring for the client who is inviting your consortium bid. So using something like the principles of the international standard, which, as you can see, is based on 8 principles, that could be a really good model to help you work through the structure and infrastructure and the rigor required to set up a good collaboration. It's tried and tested right across the UK, in fact, right across the world. And basically what it does is show you a process for managing collaborative relationships. And I would suggest that we look at this quite carefully. On the right-hand side, you'll see the Institute of Collaborative Working. There's a ton of free information there. They've got their own network of great events, lots of free information available to help you get started. You can also, and each devolved administration will have this, but because we've been so well supported by Wales, if you type into any search engine, Joint Bidding Wales, it will bring you up a joint bidding model, and it's very transferable. So it doesn't matter where you are. There is lots and lots of guidance out there to help you. So please do feel free to have a look at any of that. But the reality is, for most organisations, when we start to collaborate together, they start on the screen where it says working together. So what we think is, we've got this project, let's get up and running. What do we need? Who do we need around the table? Let's get started, off we go. But what we don't necessarily think about is, why do we need to collaborate? Why is collaboration the right vehicle for this growth for our businesses right now? What we don't necessarily stop to think about is, what are the individual objectives of each organisation in the collaboration? What are our values? What is our vision? And if we don't start to think about that at the outset, it can come as a bit of a nasty shock later when you find out that actually, potentially, one of you might be striving to reduce costs in the business and the other one is looking to add value and increase quality. And contradictions like that, if they're not understood at the outset and managed at the outset through good conversation, then they can cause really big problems later on. And the other really big area, of course, is knowledge. What do we need to know? What data have we got? What do we need? We're all surrounded by lots of big data all of the time. And the reality is that sometimes we share data for data's sake, but we don't necessarily have time to analyse that data. If in the consortium, you decide that sharing data is going to be a core part of what you do, you need to think about how that's going to help, how it's going to support the collaboration going forward, and trying not to be afraid to ask what feel like really important, but maybe uncomfortable questions. And so there's a recommendation that we would start by writing a list of the types of data that we'll need, think about and have a discussion about the willingness of the partners within the collaboration to share that information. So what's really important to the collaboration actually might be quite strategic and therefore confidential for somebody else, and vice versa. And it's important to have this conversation because, of course, all of that data, that information, it becomes the intellectual property of the consortium. So if we don't talk about it at the outset, when we come to the end of the project or the end of a contract, we don't then know what happens to that information. We don't know who owns it. We don't know where it goes or how it's being shared. You've got cybersecurity stuff in there as well. We need to think about digital platforms and the compatibility of all of those things. So that knowledge, data, digital stuff is super important. And so we shouldn't ever underestimate how important it is to have what can be quite uncomfortable conversations at the outset. But the reason for putting the ISO 44001 on screen is that using a structured process like that makes it a lot less uncomfortable, because it's just all part of the process of managing effective collaborative relationships. And then, of course, there's an assessment internally of each organisation about your strengths, your opportunities, your weaknesses, etc., to help you create that effective partnership working. And it will require everybody to be honest and open and work in that trusted and respectful environment. But then once you've got together, you're working together, you're creating the value, it kind of doesn't stop there either. There's almost a constant need to think about how you're going to communicate. So even when you've set up your consortium and then you're fortunate enough to win the contract, you'll then hopefully have done all of those upfront difficult conversations. So the rest will be about building that value and creating that value, and then, you know, obviously benefiting from that as you go. And then importantly at the outset, you would also think about your exit strategy. So in Go for Growth, we talk about it in terms of we had a chat about our divorce before we planned the wedding. And that comes directly out of your knowledge strategy and thinking about the types of knowledge, the IP that you've got, your values, how you're going to generate stuff together and how you might use that. So as awful as it might feel to talk about what happens at the end of something that you haven't even started yet, it is a really important conversation to have. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what the University of Cardiff Business School and Dr. Jane Lynch thinks makes the fundamentals of good collaboration. And number one on the list has to be leadership. And we'll talk about leadership a little bit more as well. So you need collaboration champions in your organization, or somebody that really understands the benefit of collaborative working. You need to understand why you want to collaborate. In other words, what's your value proposition around it? What's the real benefit to your organization of this collaborative effort that you're going to be putting in? Don't be put off by those early conversations. Have them as soon as possible, particularly now we're working more and more online. And we need to think about those communication behaviours. So I think we've probably all been in a position where you receive an email and it can be so easy to misinterpret or misunderstand that email. Emails that can come off quite aggressive, always haven't necessarily had that intent to start with, or you might have sent an email out and nobody replies. Silence, like in any relationship, silence can be a very dangerous thing in collaborative working, as it can in any relationship, in that sometimes we misunderstand that silence and think, oh, something must be wrong. And it might not be. It might just be that, you know, someone's busy or they're thinking about something else. But those behaviours need to be talked about and understood. And within the consortium, any contract that's managed through the consortium relationship, it might be that for some of the businesses or one of the businesses, it's worth 5% of their annual turnover, whereas for others, it might be worth 60% of their annual turnover. And so it's really important to understand all of those things at the outset, because that will help you understand the level of importance that's going to be placed on things when it becomes a difficult or a busy time for the consortia itself. And I think I've said it before, it's all about being open and honest and clear. They're really important features of effective collaborative working. And everybody needs to be able to commit to exhibiting the right behaviours from day one. And so for us, though, there's a triple win there. There's a win for you as an organisation, there's a win for the collaborative partner, and there's a win for the end user of the product and service as well. So there's lots of opportunities to be gained. And collaboration is a tried and tested model, and we know that it can deliver great benefits. But if we stick with leadership just for a second, leadership and collaboration, structured collaborative working is the key to adapting and addressing increasingly complex challenges with collaborative working. And that's especially true as we come out of the pandemic. What we've seen is a lot of open innovation. We've seen lots of businesses coming together, collaborating together, but largely it's done informally. And there's nothing wrong with that. And that definitely works for a certain amount of time. But eventually what happens is people inevitably sort of go off and focus on their own stuff and things again, their own business. And so if you don't have that structure in place, it can actually cause problems later on. And so the capability of collaborative leadership is really essential. And in terms of capabilities, it might be, especially if you're a small business, that it's you or nobody, because actually there isn't anybody around to do it other than you in a small organisation. But if that's the case, we have to be open and honest, thinking about our own skill set. Do we need to develop our own skills? What skills do we need to develop? Can we build trust? Can we manage trust within the collaboration? All of those things are really important for managing change, leading change, and certainly doing so through a collaborative working arrangement. And building trust is a crucial dimension. It takes time to build trust. But we know from our own personal experiences and maybe business experiences, it can take seconds to lose it as well. So really think carefully about and never underestimate the importance of trust. Developing the right competence is key. And we'll need to continue to develop that because situations will change, businesses change, our environments change, and so our ways of working will change, and they are changing. And that means our behaviours need to change, and the way we communicate and engage also needs to change. Personally, post-pandemic, I probably spend all day, every day, on either Teams or a Zoom meeting of some sort. And I have my favourite platforms for different types of projects or meetings that I'm having. But it's being aware of those challenges, I think, that we face with online working, and think about how you might be able to use it effectively. But what it does, of course, is it opens up opportunities for collaboration or consortia for you to be able to work with somebody that's not even in your local area, and they might not even be in the same county or country as you. So it does offer a lot of opportunity for you to be able to bring leadership through collaboration in a much stronger and more beneficial way, and much more about long-term thinking. So there's lots of digital ways of making collaborative working work virtually as well. There are lots of platforms and functionalities. You can co-author documents virtually easy, even innovation sessions. We use a tool called Flinger, I think. It makes creative development workshops using technology when we're all remote from each other much easier. Admittedly, we're in a Zoom webinar today, and we've already wondered whether a webinar was the right structure for this particular session today. And that's definitely an area that Go for Growth will think about and improve on, to make sessions like this more personal and more intimate and make discussion a bit easier. But I think there's a message in there as well that we can't be afraid of knowing that we need to develop or learn or improve. That's part of the challenge that we face in business and in life in general. We all need to do it, probably all of the time. I mean, you know, we are constantly learning as both people and as businesses as we go, and we need to embrace that for collaborative working as much as we possibly can. And then, like anything, collaboration does bring its own challenges. It carries risk if it isn't managed well. And I think particularly thinking about your client whose contract it is that you're going to be fulfilling through consortium working, we need to assure them that the proposal is as seamless as if it was by one single organisation. So in a consortium, particularly if you're thinking of public sector work, then you need to be thinking as one business. And that's why the lead body model could help you to be able to do that in a more effective way. And it's really important, if you use a loose, informal structure for managing consortium, it will almost certainly cause problems at some stage. Collaboration does, as we've said, takes time. If you're thinking about contracts around 6 months away, now is the time to start. And make sure that you carve out that time, you take the time. The biggest amount of time is finding the right partner organisations. So don't underestimate that or feel rushed into choosing somebody just for the sake of it. Spend that time thinking about how you're going to work together and whether and how an organisation is going to be right for you. Just really quickly, in the automotive sector, and I'm not saying that you should spend 6 years doing it, but in the automotive sector, traditionally, they'll spend 6 years trying to find a new partner. So let's not underestimate it. Let's think about those imbalances. Is it worth 5% of business to you, but 60% of business to you? How are we going to manage that? And we've talked about effective communication, but thinking about time and frequency of how we meet. And thankfully, Zoom and Teams, they do help us do that. But also having face-to-face time together is really important. Think about how and when you'll do that. So Go for Growth as an example. Myself and my co-directors, we meet weekly via Teams for an hour, and every quarter we have a full day together face-to-face to talk through a strategic development of the business. And we also ensure that we have dinner together. We have some social time too. Now, Jimmy, Sherry and I, the three of us, we knew each other together before we started working together. Sorry, we had a buyer-supplier relationship for about 6 years before we decided to form a consortia. And even then, we needed to work through the shift in those relationships and what our roles were going to be. The one thing I would say is that the trust was there from working together. It wasn't a cold start to a relationship. So we were building from an existing position of mutual respect and trust. And so you need to think about finance, insurance, if any TUPE applies to your consortia, that kind of thing. Take some support from agencies that are there to support you. That could be Go for Growth. We'll help you as much as we possibly can. Or we can connect you to other specialists, local chambers and FSB, those kind of, the Federation for Small Businesses, those kind of organisations are always helpful for when you're thinking about things like partnership working. But one of the keys is, do think about it as a long-term strategy as opposed to a short-term gain. And I'm going to pause the recording just now. So let me just